Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and be silent. Because the story you're about to hear works best in the quiet, when every sound feels louder and your mind starts imagining things on its own. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from and what time is it right now? So without any further discussion, let's begin. I moved into the dorm at the end of August, when the air still held onto summer, but everything else felt like it was already rushing toward fall. I remember thinking the building looked older than the others, its brick darkened unevenly by time and weather, like it had absorbed too many seasons without complaint. It wasn't run down, just tired. That was the word that came to mind as I stood outside with my duffel bag cutting into my shoulder, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the closer, softer sounds of students laughing somewhere behind me. I was a first-year student, technically an adult, though I didn't feel like one yet. I'd chosen this campus because it was far enough from home to feel like escape, but close enough that I could still go back if something went wrong. That was how I framed it to my parents, anyway. The truth was quieter. I wanted to disappear just a little, start over without having to explain myself to anyone who already knew they knew me. Dorm life was supposed to be part of that. Shared space, new routines, a roommate whose habits I'd have to learn the way you learn a foreign language, slowly, by listening more than speaking. I was eager for it, or at least eager for the version of myself I thought would thrive in it. Still, as I waited for the elevator that first afternoon, I felt a faint, persistent tightness in my chest, like my body had noticed something my mind hadn't yet named. The elevator took longer than expected. When the doors finally slid open, the inside smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older underneath it. Dust, maybe, or fabric that had been cleaned too many times. I remember noticing how the light flickered once before stabilizing. Just once, enough to register, not enough to seem important. I told myself I was already reading too much into things. My room was on the 4th floor. The hallway was narrow, lined with identical doors and carpet worn thin along the center, where generations of students had dragged suitcases and laundry baskets back and forth. The air was cooler there, even though the windows at the ends were open. It felt like stepping into a place that preferred quiet. I settled into a routine quickly. Classes in the morning, the library in the afternoon, dinner wherever I felt least like thinking. At night, I studied at my desk while the campus slowly exhaled around me, doors closing, footsteps fading, the occasional laugh drifting in from somewhere far away. My roommate hadn't arrived yet. There'd been an email about a delay, something administrative. I didn't mind. The extra space felt like a small mercy. Living alone, even temporarily, sharpened my awareness of everything. The way the radiator clicked before it warmed, the faint vibration in the walls when someone down the hall shut their door too hard. The building had a rhythm, subtle but consistent, and once I noticed it, I couldn't stop listening for it. Sometimes I'd pause mid-sentence in my notes, pen hovering, waiting for a sound I couldn't quite identify, only to realize I was holding my breath. During the day, the dorm felt ordinary. Sunlight slanted through the stairwell windows, bulletin boards filled with flyers for clubs and study groups. Someone practiced guitar in a room nearby, always the same unfinished melody. It was easy then to forget that the building had a past beyond move-in weekend and maintenance schedules. I heard about the disappearance a week in, standing in line for coffee. 2 upperclassmen were talking behind me, their voices low but careless, the way people speak when they don't think the subject really matters. A student, years ago, same dorm, vanished mid-semester. No signs of struggle, no clear answers. One of them laughed it off, said it was probably just someone who dropped out and didn't tell anyone. I told myself the same thing. Campuses collect stories the way old houses do, rumors layered over half-truths until no one remembers where they started. Still, when I walked back to my room later, I found myself counting the doors as I passed them, noticing which ones were scuffed, which had new name tags, which were blank. I wondered, briefly, which one had belonged to the student they'd mentioned. Then I told myself that was morbid and forced my attention back to the paper due the next day. That night, I woke up thinking someone was standing just inside my doorway. The thought arrived fully formed, complete with the certainty that makes sleep feel thin and unreliable. My eyes opened to darkness, softened by the orange glow of the streetlight outside. The room was exactly as I'd left it, empty, quiet. After a few seconds, my heart slowed, embarrassed by its own reaction. I lay there, listening, until the silence settled back into something familiar. The next morning, I couldn't remember what had triggered it. No sound, no dream, just the feeling. As the weeks passed, I explored more of the campus, shortcuts between buildings, the quiet corners of the library where time seemed to stall. I liked knowing where I was, liked mapping my days into predictable shapes. The dorm remained a place I passed through more than inhabited. I slept there, studied there, but I didn't linger. Something about the stillness pressed in too closely when I stayed too long. My roommate still hadn't arrived. Emails went unanswered. Housing assured me it was being handled. I tried not to read into that. Plenty of students changed plans last minute. It wasn't unusual. And yet, sometimes when I unlocked the door at night, I'd hesitate before stepping inside, listening for a sound that would confirm I wasn't alone or one that would prove I was. Once, halfway through unpacking a box I'd been avoiding, I noticed the room felt colder than usual. Not dramatically, just enough that the air raised goosebumps along my arms. I stood there, hands resting on the edge of the box, waiting for the radiator to click on. It didn't. The cold lingered, steady and indifferent, until I finally sat down and pretended not to notice. I told myself I was adjusting. New place, new life. Everyone feels unsteady at first. But late at night, when the building settled and the sounds thinned out, I had the persistent sense that I was missing something obvious, like a word on the tip of my tongue or a door I'd walked past too many times without opening. The rumors faded into the background, but they never fully left. Sometimes, as I drifted towards sleep, I wondered how well you could really know a place that had existed long before you arrived, what it remembered, what it kept quiet, and whether living there meant becoming part of that silence, even if you never meant to. I didn't think the dorm was dangerous. I still don't, not in the way people usually mean. But standing there, alone in a room meant for two, listening to the building breathe around me, I began to understand that safety and familiarity aren't the same thing, and that some places don't need to do anything at all to make you uneasy. They just need time. My roommate arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in class. I came back to find the other bed made, too neatly, the blanket folded with a precision that felt practiced rather than hurried. A suitcase stood upright beside the desk, already empty. For a moment, I thought I'd walked into the wrong room. Then I noticed my backpack where I'd left it, my notebook still open on the desk, pen resting exactly where I remembered dropping it. She was sitting on the bed, hands folded in her lap, looking toward the window, not out of it, at it, as if the glass itself required attention. When she turned to look at me, her expression softened into something polite and almost careful. We exchanged names, nothing unusual. Her voice was quiet, steady, without the nervous over-explanation I'd come to expect from first meetings. When she smiled, it was brief, like a reflex she didn't trust. I remember thinking she seemed tired, not the end of semester kind of tired, something older. The first strange thing she said came later that night. We were both at our desks, the room lit by our lamps, the rest of the building settling into its usual hush. Without looking at me, she asked if anyone had ever told me I looked familiar. I laughed because that's what you do when a comment lands oddly but not yet alarmingly. I said something about having a generic face. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her tone was thoughtful, almost curious. "No," she said, "not generic, specific." I waited for her to explain. She didn't. A few minutes later, I realized she was watching me, not directly, but in that indirect way you feel before you see it. When I turned, she looked back at her laptop, fingers hovering over the keys, unmoving. The moment stretched, then passed. I told myself I was being sensitive. After that, there were small things, harmless things. I'd leave my key on the desk and find it on the windowsill. My phone charger would be unplugged and coiled neatly, though I knew I hadn't touched it. Once, I found a sweater folded at the foot of my bed that I was certain I'd left in the laundry room. Each time, I ran through the same list of explanations: stress, distraction, shared space. Memory is unreliable, especially when routines shift. My roommate never mentioned moving anything. I never asked. She had a habit of standing very still, not frozen, just unmoving, as if she'd settled into a position and forgotten to leave it. Sometimes I'd enter the room and find her by the closet, facing the wall, shoulders relaxed, breathing slow. She'd turn when she heard me, expression neutral, and resume whatever she'd been doing. Other times, I'd wake in the night and sense her awake too, the room filled with the quiet awareness of two people not sleeping. In the dark, it was impossible to tell where she was looking. She commented on my appearance more often than felt normal. My hair, mostly. She asked if I'd ever cut it short, if I'd considered wearing it differently. Once, while I was brushing my teeth in the communal bathroom, she stood in the doorway and watched my reflection with an intensity that made my hand falter. "You really do look like her," she said, softly. I asked who she meant. She blinked, as if surprised by the question. "Never mind," she said. "I thought you knew." That night, I dreamed of reading something over and over again without understanding it. The words shifted on the page, rearranging themselves just beyond comprehension. I woke with the sensation that I'd forgotten something important. The room was quiet. My roommate's bed was empty. The whispers started soon after. Not voices, exactly, more like the suggestion of sound, hovering at the edge of perception. A breath where there shouldn't have been one. The faint impression of my name being thought rather than spoken. I'd pause, listening, heart thudding, only to hear nothing but the low hum of the building. When I mentioned it to myself, never out loud, it sounded ridiculous. Old pipes, air vents, the mind filling in gaps. But the timing was wrong. The whispers came when the room was still, when there was no mechanical reason for noise. Once, while I was studying late, I felt the unmistakable sensation of someone standing close behind me. I could almost feel the warmth of a body, the subtle displacement of air. I didn't turn around right away. I waited, counting my breaths, until the feeling faded. When I finally looked, the room was empty. My roommate was in the shower down the hall. I could hear the water running. A few days later, I found a notebook tucked beneath my mattress. It wasn't mine. The cover was worn, the edges softened by use. Inside, the handwriting was neat, deliberate. Dates filled the margins. Some entries were mundane, class notes, reminders, fragments of thoughts. Others were more personal, observations about people, about feeling unseen, about wanting to be remembered accurately, not as a rumor or a cautionary tale. I told myself it must belong to my roommate, that she'd misplaced it. Still, my hands shook as I turned the pages. About halfway through, I found an entry that described a dorm room identical to mine. Same layout, same view from the window. The writer mentioned a roommate who hadn't arrived yet. I closed the notebook and slid it back where I'd found it. I I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, there was a campus announcement taped to the bulletin board near the elevator. A faded flyer, half hidden beneath newer ones, asking for information about a missing student. The photo had yellowed with age, but the face was clear enough. Same eyes, same curve of the mouth, same expression I saw in the mirror every morning, slightly uncertain, like the photographer had asked for a smile she wasn't ready to give. I stood there longer than necessary, pretending to read something else. A few students passed by without looking. I wondered how long the flyer had been there. Weeks? Years? Whether it had always been partially covered, or if someone had uncovered it recently. When I returned to my room, my roommate was sitting on her bed, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. "You found it," she said. My mouth opened, then closed. I realized I didn't know which "it" she meant. The notebook, the flyer, the connection I'd been avoiding. That evening, as the light faded and the room grew quiet, I noticed something new on my desk. A photograph, black and white. The missing student, seated at the same desk, in the same room. On the back, written in familiar handwriting, were 3 words: "You remember now." I stood there, holding the photo, aware of my roommate's presence behind me. I didn't turn around, not yet. I listened to the building settle, to the silence thickening like a held breath, and wondered, briefly, irrationally, whether memory was something you could inherit, or something that could be given back, whether you wanted it or not. The campus has a way of pretending nothing ever really happens. Buildings get renamed, plaques get polished. Whatever doesn't fit the brochure fades into background texture. I learned that slowly, through people who spoke as if every word needed to be weighed before release. It started with the resident advisor on our floor. He was older than most of us, a graduate student who moved through the hallways like he was already half gone. One evening, as I struggled with the laundry machine that refused to accept my card, he watched me for a moment longer than necessary. "You're in 417, right?" he asked. When I nodded, he hesitated. The pause was small but deliberate, like a door held shut by a hand on the other side. "If anything feels off," he said finally, "you should come get me. Some rooms, they don't settle the way others do." He smiled after that as if to soften the statement and walked away before I could ask what he meant. The machine accepted my card on the next try. I stood there with the sound of it filling with water, trying to convince myself that he'd just been making conversation. Friends were harder to read. I'd met a few people in my classes, study partners who drifted in and out of my days. When I mentioned my dorm, reactions varied. Raised eyebrows, quick looks exchanged, a subtle shift in posture. No one said anything outright. They didn't need to. One girl told me she'd transferred out of that building after her first year because it felt wrong. Another laughed and said she'd heard it was haunted, then immediately added that she didn't believe in that sort of thing. I started to notice how often conversations stalled around that subject, like there was a shared understanding about where not to linger. Late one afternoon, I went to the campus archives. I told myself it was for a history assignment, which was technically true. The archives were in the basement of the oldest administrative building, a place that smelled like paper and temperature control. The archivist barely looked up when I signed in. She slid a cart toward me with practiced indifference. The records were dry at first. Enrollment lists, housing assignments, incident reports stripped of anything resembling emotion. It wasn't until I started cross-referencing names that patterns emerged. The missing student, her name appeared more often than I expected. Student organizations, a tutoring program, a campus newspaper article with her byline. She hadn't been a recluse, she'd been everywhere. I found a report filed 3 weeks after her disappearance. The language was careful, almost apologetic. No signs of forced exit, no witnesses. Room found undisturbed. That word again, as if absence itself could be neutral. Scrolling through archived social media posts felt more intrusive. Her profile was still there, frozen in time. Photos of campus in different seasons, captions that veered between optimism and exhaustion. A post from mid-semester stood out. No photo, just text. Sometimes I feel like I'm being rewritten while I sleep. I stared at that line longer than I should have. Around me, the archives hummed quietly. Fluorescent lights, the distant sound of footsteps overhead. Everything normal, everything solid. When I returned to the dorm that night, my roommate was waiting. She'd spread papers across her bed, printouts, photocopies, handwritten notes. They were arranged neatly, grouped by category, dates, names, photos. My stomach tightened before I consciously understood why. She didn't look up when I entered. She didn't need to. "You're finding her," she said, not a question. I asked her how long she'd been researching. My voice sounded steady, even to me. She smiled faintly, like I'd confirmed something she already knew. "Longer than you," she said. "Long enough to know that no one ever looks hard enough. They get uncomfortable. They stop." I noticed then that many of the photos were ones I'd seen already. Some I hadn't, angles that suggested distance, observation. In one, the missing girl stood in front of the dorm looking over her shoulder. The resemblance was undeniable. It felt less like looking at another person and more like confronting a version of myself I didn't remember living. My roommate spoke quietly, methodically. She talked about admiration first, how brilliant the girl had been, how perceptive, then fear, how quickly admiration could turn when you realize someone is seeing too much. Finally, fixation. She didn't use the word, she didn't have to. It hung between us, heavy and unspoken. "She didn't disappear," my roommate said. "She was erased. That's different." I asked her why she cared so much. Why now? She finally looked at me then, really looked. "Because you're the first thing that's gone wrong in years," she said. "You don't fit the decay pattern." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't ask. The room felt smaller than it had that morning, the air dense, unmoving. I became acutely aware of the walls, the ceiling, the way the window reflected us back at ourselves. Over the next few days, information followed me without effort. A janitor who lingered while emptying trash, telling me he'd once found a room unlocked in the middle of the night, lights on, no one inside. A professor who paused mid-lecture when she saw me in the front row, then continued with a tremor in her voice. A librarian who slipped an extra file into my stack and whispered, "Be careful what you reconstruct." The records in that file were older, handwritten notes from campus security, a list of anomalies no one had wanted to formalize, students reporting the sense of being watched, objects relocated without explanation. The same room number appeared more than once. At night, my roommate typed late into the darkness, the glow of her screen painting the walls in cold light. I stopped asking what she was working on. I already knew. Sometimes she'd pause and glance at me, as if checking alignment. Other times she'd murmur dates under her breath, tracing timelines that felt uncomfortably close to my own. One evening, I caught sight of her browser history reflected faintly in the window. Searches about identity transference, memory degradation, environmental imprinting. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to feel a slow, creeping panic. The micro moments were the worst. Opening my phone to find a draft message I hadn't written, discovering my handwriting in the margins of a book I didn't own, hearing my name spoken in my own voice from somewhere down the hall, only to find it empty when I followed the sound. Each time I told myself there was an explanation. Each time the explanations grew thinner. One night, while I was showering, I realized I couldn't remember when I'd last spoken to my parents. Not because we'd argued, not because I'd been busy. The memory simply wasn't there. The thought arrived like a sudden drop in temperature. I stood there until the water went cold, heart pounding, trying to reconstruct something that refused to take shape. When I returned to the room, my roommate was holding a photo I recognized too well. "You're closer than she ever got. That's why this is happening faster." I asked her what this was. She considered the question, then shook her head. "If I say it, it'll finish the process." That was the first true cliff, the moment where denial lost its footing. I lay awake that night listening to the building breathe, counting the seconds between sounds, wondering how much of a person could be replaced before anyone noticed, wondering whether obsession was the cause of what had happened or just the first symptom. Just before sleep took me, I felt the unmistakable sensation of a memory settling into place. Not mine, not entirely. It fit anyway, like it had been waiting. The next morning, my reflection looked tired, familiar, and for the first time when I tried to picture the girl from the flyers, I couldn't remember where she ended and I began. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to reject. Instead, it unfolded the way habits do, incremental, almost considerate, as if whatever was changing wanted to give me time to adjust. The first time my roommate laid clothes out on my bed, I assumed she'd made a mistake. A skirt, a sweater, folded with careful symmetry. Not my style, not my size either, at least not exactly. I stood there longer than necessary, fingers hovering just above the fabric. It smelled faintly of detergent I didn't use, something floral and distant. When she came in behind me, she didn't apologize. "You used to like that color," she said. I reminded her, gently, that she was confusing me with someone else. She smiled in a way that suggested she was humoring me. "Only because you don't remember yet," she said. After that, the room began to feel curated. Items appeared that hadn't been there before. A mug with a chipped rim placed beside my textbooks, a scarf draped over the chair, notebooks stacked in a particular order. When I moved them, they returned, always slightly adjusted, improved, as if someone were refining a version of me I hadn't agreed to become. She started waking me earlier than my alarm, not by touching me, just by opening the blinds at exactly the same time every morning, light spilling across my face, insistent. When I asked why, she said I used to study better before breakfast. She began suggesting routes across campus I'd never taken, but somehow felt familiar once I walked them. I hated that part the most, the way my body responded before my mind could object. At night, she played music softly from her laptop, old recordings, instrumental, melancholic without being dramatic. She said it helped me sleep. I didn't remember asking for help, but I slept anyway, deeply, too deeply. I started waking with fragments of dreams that felt like memories, standing in places I'd never been, speaking to people whose names sat just out of reach. The building changed with her behavior, or maybe I only started noticing it then. Doors down the hall creaked open on their own and stayed that way, yawning into darkness. Once, I watched our door swing inward while I was sitting on my bed, the latch turning slowly, deliberately. There was no rush of air, no footsteps, just the quiet sound of wood moving against frame. Shadows misbehaved. I don't know how else to put it. They lingered where there was no object to cast them, stretched when nothing shifted. More than once, I caught movement in the corner of my eye, something passing behind me in the mirror, only to find the room unchanged when I turned. Each time my heart raced, then settled. I became very good at pretending not to notice. Sounds carried oddly. A laugh from the floor below would echo too long, flattening into something unrecognizable. The elevator dinged at all hours, even when no one got on or off. Once, late at night, I heard someone humming in the hallway. The tune was unfamiliar, that I knew when it ended before it did. I lay still until the sound dissolved into the walls. The patterns emerged quietly. I found myself gravitating toward the same bench outside the science building every afternoon, though I couldn't remember choosing it the first time. Later, while combing through the archives again, this time without pretending it was for class, I found a photo of her sitting on that bench, head bent over a notebook, same posture, same angle of light. The date stamped in the corner made my stomach twist. My class schedule began to resemble hers, not exactly, but close enough to feel intentional. When I switched an elective at the last minute, I discovered she'd taken that course too. Same professor, same classroom. I stood at the doorway on the first day, hit by the overwhelming sense that I was arriving late to something I'd already started. My roommate noticed before I did. "You're sinking faster now," she said one evening, watching me pack my bag for the next day. "That's good." I asked her what happened when the process finished. The words slipped out before I could stop it. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a hairbrush. Dark strands were tangled in the bristles. My hair, or hers, or someone else's. She set it on my desk with quiet finality. "You stop feeling so tired," she said eventually. The dorm itself seemed to cooperate. My key card worked less reliably, forcing me to wait outside longer than I liked. Once, when I finally got the door open, I found the lights already on and my desk chair pulled out, waiting. Another time, I returned to find the window open despite the cold, curtains stirring as if someone had just passed through them. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like rain that hadn't fallen. I started finding notes in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing, reminders, observations. One simply read, "Fourth floor feels thinner tonight." I didn't know what that meant, but reading it made my skin prickle. The worst realization came gradually, assembling itself from small, undeniable truths. I reacted to her name when I heard it spoken aloud, even when it wasn't meant for me. I corrected people using facts about her life without realizing it. I remembered assignments she'd turned in, friends she'd mentioned online. The memories didn't arrive whole. They leaked in, impression by impression, until they felt less like intrusions and more like recovered property. One afternoon, while walking back to the dorm, I took a wrong turn and ended up standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with certainty. I knew what was inside. I knew which floor, which room. I left quickly, shaken by the knowledge that had surfaced without invitation. That night, the power flickered, just once, enough to reset the clocks. When the lights came back on, my roommate was standing beside my bed, holding one of the old photographs. "You used to hate when this happened," she said. "You said it made the walls feel closer." I asked her, quietly, what would happen if I left. She tilted her head, considering. "You can't leave something unfinished," she said. "You tried that already." The room felt colder then, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to notice. I lay awake afterward, listening to the building settle, feeling the weight of routines pressing down on me like instructions I was failing to follow. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd thought of myself without also thinking of her. The distinction had blurred, softened at the edges. I clung to my name like an anchor, repeating it silently, afraid that if I stopped, it might slip away. In the dark, the dorm made its quiet, patient sounds, doors breathing, pipes ticking, the suggestion of movement where there was none, and beneath it all, a pattern tightening, steady, deliberate, waiting for me to fall fully in step. I didn't confront her right away. I think part of me was afraid that putting words to it would make it solid, irreversible. As long as the suspicion stayed unspoken, it felt like something I could still outthink. The proof arrived anyway. It was late, well past the hour when the dorm settled into its shallow, restless sleep. My roommate had left the room for once, said she needed to check something in the common area. The door closed softly behind her, and for the first time in days, I was alone without the feeling of being observed. I noticed her desk then, not the surface, that had always been meticulously arranged, but the bottom drawer. It was slightly open, barely enough to register, but enough to break the symmetry she was so careful about maintaining. I told myself I was just closing it. Inside were notebooks, more than I expected, all labeled in the same handwriting, dates spanning years, some from before I'd ever applied to the school. My hands were steady as I lifted the first one. That scared me more than if they'd been shaking. The entries weren't about me, not at first. They were about her fixation, her certainty. She wrote about the missing girl not as someone lost, but as someone incomplete, interrupted. There were pages of speculation, environmental memory, identity imprinting, places that retained people the way fabric retained scent. She described the dorm as a vessel, not a structure. And then my name appeared, not as a subject, as a confirmation. She knew that the girl hadn't died, that she'd been displaced, folded into the building, into its routines, its walls, its habits, waiting for a suitable structure to reassert itself, waiting for someone close enough in shape, in temperament, in circumstance. Me. She's not gone, one entry read. She's unfinished, and unfinished things always resume. I sat there longer than I should have, the room quiet except for the faint electrical hum in the walls. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. The sound felt too loud, like it had happened too close. The next notebook detailed what she called preparations, adjustments, encouragements, the clothing, the routines, the music, all framed as assistance, not coercion. She wrote about me like a patient collaborator who just didn't remember agreeing. At the back of the drawer, beneath the notebooks, were printed maps of the dorm. Not the ones given to students. These were older, hand-drawn editions marked in pencil. Arrows, measurements. A narrow section behind our room circled repeatedly, annotated with words that made my throat tighten. Structural inconsistency, void space, access uncertain. I remembered the way the wall sometimes sounded hollow when someone knocked nearby, the way the temperature shifted along one corner of the room, the way shadows seemed to hesitate there. The building wasn't just remembering, it was holding something. I heard footsteps in the hallway and slid everything back into place just as the door opened. My roommate returned, carrying nothing, expression calm. She glanced at her desk, then at me. Her gaze lingered for a fraction of a second too long. That night I dreamed of narrow spaces, of moving sideways through dark, my shoulders brushing against surfaces that felt warm, almost yielding. I woke with the sense that I hadn't been alone in the dream, that I'd been following instructions left behind by someone who trusted me to finish what they couldn't. The next day, I skipped class and went back to the archives. This time I asked for records related to renovations, repairs, anything involving structural changes to the dorm. The archivist hesitated, then complied. Her hands shook slightly as she passed me the folder. There had been an incident, officially categorized as a maintenance anomaly. A section of wall discovered hollow during routine inspection. No explanation. The space had been sealed. No report filed as to why it existed in the first place. Unofficially, scribbled in the margin of a supplemental report, there was mention of student activity, late-night gatherings, a ritualized element. Nothing supernatural, just students experimenting with identity, presence, the idea of leaving something behind that could outlast them. The missing girl's name appeared again. So did mine. Not explicitly, but the parallels were undeniable. Same stressors, same academic pressure, same isolation, same room, same slow erosion of certainty. By the time I returned to the dorm, my head felt full of static. The hallway lights flickered as I passed beneath them, one by one, like a countdown I hadn't agreed to participate in. Inside the room, my roommate was waiting. She'd rearranged the furniture, subtly. The beds angled closer together. The desk shifted nearer to the wall, the hollow wall. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said. I didn't ask what way she meant. My chest felt tight, my thoughts sluggish, as if something were pressing inward from all sides. "She's not possessing you," my roommate continued. "That's too simple, too dramatic. She's aligning, and you're letting her." I told her she was wrong. The words sounded thin, even to me. She reached out, not to touch me, but to gesture toward the wall. "She left an impression," she said. "You're completing it." The room felt different then, smaller, or maybe more focused. The air near that corner was colder, heavier. I realized with a slow, sinking dread that I could feel it, an awareness that wasn't thought, wasn't sound, but something closer to intention. I thought about the memories that didn't feel borrowed anymore, the routines that fit too well, the exhaustion that lifted only when I stopped resisting. I wondered, not for the first time, whether identity was something fixed or something maintained through constant effort, and what happened when you got too tired to keep maintaining it. That night, I stood alone in the room while my roommate watched from the doorway. I pressed my palm against the hollow wall. It was warmer than it should have been. For a moment, a terrifying, intimate moment, I knew exactly where to press, where the space would give, where something unfinished was waiting. I pulled my hand away, heart racing, mind fracturing under the weight of competing truths. Either I was being manipulated by someone who needed me to disappear, or I was remembering how I already had. Behind me, the dorm settled, patient and attentive. And in the silence, a thought surfaced with unnerving clarity. Not planted, not whispered, just there. "This is where you stopped last time." I didn't sleep after that. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to hold myself together through repetition, through memory, through fear. But beneath all of it, deeper than panic, was something worse: recognition. I tried to tell someone. That was my first mistake, assuming that explanation still belonged to me. I went to campus security on a gray morning when the sky felt too low, pressing down on the buildings like a held hand. The office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. A student worker sat behind the desk, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up as I spoke. I explained carefully, too carefully. I avoided words like spirit, ritual, possession. I talked about my roommate's behavior, the notes, the rearranged room, the sense of being monitored. She nodded, typed, asked for my roommate's name. When she returned from the back office, her expression had shifted, not to concern, but to polite confusion. "She stopped by earlier," the student worker said you'd been under a lot of stress, that you might say some strange things. I felt the room tilt slightly. I asked what else she'd said. She continued that you were worried about rumors, that you scare yourself sometimes. She seemed concerned. Concerned, the word landed wrong, like a label applied too neatly. A security officer came out then, older, tired-eyed. He asked if I'd been sleeping, if I was keeping up with my classes, if I'd had anxiety issues before college. His voice was gentle, practiced. I realized with a dull shock that he'd already decided what I was. I left with a pamphlet about counseling services and the distinct understanding that whatever narrative existed now, I wasn't the one telling it. After that, doors began closing more deliberately. My advisor canceled our meeting and suggested I take a lighter course load. A professor asked if everything was okay at home, then didn't wait for my answer. For friends stopped texting back with the same urgency. When I tried to explain, their eyes slid away, not skeptical exactly, just unwilling. My roommate became careful in public, warm, supportive. She touched my arm lightly when others were around, asked if I'd eaten, reminded me to rest. In private, she didn't bother pretending. The first time she locked the door, I didn't realize it right away. I'd come back from the library late, exhausted, head buzzing. The hallway lights flickered as I approached our room, one after another, as if acknowledging me. When I turned the handle, it didn't move. I tried again. Nothing. From inside, I heard her voice, calm, reassuring. "You don't need to go out so much," she said. "You get disoriented." When she finally unlocked it, she acted surprised by my reaction, told me it was an accident, a habit. I believed her just long enough to hate myself for it. After that, the door was often locked when I didn't expect it. The windows, too, stuck fast, no matter how hard I pushed. My phone lost signal in the room, then slowly everywhere else. Messages failed to send, calls dropped mid-ring. I started leaving my charger in my bag, afraid to set anything down that might not be where I left it. The injuries began quietly. A bruise on my wrist, yellowed at the edges before I remembered earning it. Scratches along my forearm, shallow but precise, as if made by fingernails. Once I woke with a dull ache in my shoulder and the faint imprint of pressure, like I'd been pinned there for a long time. When I asked her about it, she looked genuinely confused. "You've always been restless at night," she said. She was too. The reenactments came next. She guided me, always gently, always insistently, back into routines I no longer questioned until I was already inside them. Sitting at the desk at exactly the same hour, walking the same loop through campus, even when it took longer, standing in the corner of the room where the air felt thickest, listening. Once, she handed me a notebook and asked me to write. "I don't know what," I said. "You will," she replied. My hand moved before my mind did. The words that appeared weren't new. They felt practiced, inevitable. When I finished, she closed the notebook without reading it, like the outcome mattered more than the content. I started losing time. Minutes at first, then hours. I'd blink and find myself seated on my bed, shoes still on, daylight gone. I'd wake up with the taste of dust in my mouth and no memory of sleeping. The walls seemed closer during those gaps. The room subtly altered, furniture shifted, objects aligned. One night, I tried to leave while she was in the shower. I didn't make it past the hallway. The lights went out all at once, plunging everything into a darkness that felt deliberate. Not the absence of light, but its withdrawal. I froze, heart hammering, listening to the hum of the building change pitch. Somewhere nearby, something moved, slow, heavy, scraping softly along the floor. I felt a hand close around my wrist, not hers. The grip was firm, impersonal, guiding rather than restraining. I was steered back toward my room, the door opening before I reached it. When the lights returned, I was inside again, seated on my bed, my roommate kneeling in front of me. Her eyes were bright, focused, almost reverent. "You can't rush it," she said. "She tried that. That's why it failed." I didn't scream. The idea didn't even occur to me. Fear had narrowed into something more controlled, more dangerous, compliance masquerading as survival. She stopped asking what I wanted. Instead, she spoke about what was required: completion, alignment, closure. She showed me more records, more photos, more fragments of the girl's final weeks, late nights, missed calls, notes that grew increasingly circular, a fixation on the wall, on leaving something intact behind. "She didn't have help," my roommate said. "She panicked. You won't." The dorm seemed to respond to her certainty. The hollow wall pulsed faintly when she spoke near it, warmth radiating through the plaster. I felt it even from across the room, a low pressure behind my eyes, a pull that wasn't quite physical. I tried once more to reach out, to email my parents, to leave a message, anything. The email bounced back, undeliverable. The message app froze. My phone screen reflected my face back at me, pale and unfamiliar. "You're safer here," my roommate said, standing too close. "Out there, they'll just try to fix you." Her patience thinned after that. She raised her voice for the first time, not loud, just sharp. She corrected me when I used my name, interrupted me when I spoke about my past, insisted on calling me by hers, then acted wounded when I resisted. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. You're almost there." The final escalation came without warning. I woke to darkness and the sound of scraping, metal against brick. My wrists were bound loosely, deliberately, enough to remind me without cutting off circulation. The furniture had been cleared away. The wall stood exposed, marked with faint chalk lines I didn't remember drawing. My roommate stood beside it, breathing fast, eyes shining. "This is where it happened. This is where it stopped." I felt the room tilt inward, reality thinning at the edges. Memories surged, standing here before, pressing my hands against the wall, feeling it yield just slightly, feeling hope, fear, the certainty that I was running out of time. I didn't know anymore whether those memories were mine, or whether that distinction still mattered. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the wall, her voice trembling with urgency. "Finish it before it chooses for you." The building was very quiet then. No hum, no distant laughter, no footsteps. Just the sound of my own breathing and the slow, patient awareness pressing in from all sides. I realized with cold clarity that no one was coming, not because they didn't care, but because to them nothing was wrong. And as I stood there, bound in a room that remembered me better than I remembered myself, I understood the true danger wasn't what my roommate believed. It was how close I was to believing it too. She led me there just after midnight, when the dorm felt hollowed out, its usual noises pared down to something thin and watchful. The bindings were gone by then. She said she trusted me. I didn't correct her. Trust implied choice, and I wasn't certain how much of that I had left. We didn't take the stairs or the elevator. Instead, she unlocked a door at the far end of the fourth-floor hallway, one I'd passed dozens of times without noticing. It opened into a narrow service corridor, unfinished and dim, the walls unpainted, the floor uneven beneath my feet. The air grew colder with every step, carrying the smell of dust and something mineral like old stone. "This part isn't on the maps," she said quietly. "It was sealed after." After what, she didn't say. She didn't need to. The corridor sloped downward, subtly at first, then more noticeably, until my ears popped with the change in pressure. I had the strange sensation of being folded inward, like the building was closing around us, guiding us somewhere it had been waiting to show me. We emerged into a space that felt older than the rest of the dorm, not abandoned, preserved. The ceiling was low, the beams exposed and darkened with age. Pipes ran along the walls, some disconnected, others humming faintly. At the far end, a section of brick looked different, cleaner, recently disturbed. I stopped there without being told. My body recognized it before my mind did. "This is where she went," my roommate said. Her voice trembled now, no longer controlled. She wasn't trying to leave, she was trying to stay, to make sure she didn't vanish completely. The ritual, if that was the right word, hadn't been occult. No chanting, no symbols, just repetition, presence, the deliberate act of pressing yourself into a place until it remembered you better than the world did, until it chose to hold you. She misjudged the timing, my roommate said. She was alone. She panicked. The building closed before she was finished. I looked at the brickwork, at the faint outline where something had been sealed. I could feel it now, clearly, the awareness behind it. Not conscious, not sentient, just accumulative, a gravity made of habit and memory. "And you?" I asked. She swallowed. I tried to finish it for her. The words landed with quiet devastation. She told me about the nights she spent here, about how the space responded to her attention but never quite aligned, about how she realized, slowly, that she wasn't compatible, too rigid, too anchored. She admired the girl because she was permeable in ways my roommate could never be. She needed someone like you, someone who could adapt, someone already in transition, someone new, someone unrooted, someone tired. The truth settled into me with a weight I couldn't deflect anymore. I hadn't been chosen at random. I'd been selected because I was already coming apart at the seams. "You're not replacing her," my roommate said, stepping closer. "You're letting her finish, letting her exist again, and when it's done," her voice broke, "I won't be alone anymore." The space behind the brick pulsed, subtle but unmistakable. A low vibration I felt in my teeth, my chest. Memories surged, not just hers, not just mine. The girl's final moments, sharp with urgency. Her hope that someone would come after her, her fear that no one would. I understood then what completion meant. It meant opening the space fully. It meant letting what was inside expand outward, into me. I stepped back. The movement startled my roommate. Her expression shifted, desperation flaring. "You're almost there," she said. "You feel it, don't you? You know this is right." I did feel it, the pull, the promise of rest, of continuity, of not having to assert myself against the world every second just to remain intact. That was what made it dangerous. "No," I said. The word scraped its way out of me, unfamiliar but solid. "You don't want her back. You want proof that this meant something." Her face hardened. "Don't do this." I moved before she could stop me, not toward the wall, but past her, toward the narrow corridor behind us. She grabbed my arm, nails digging in, and for a moment we were locked together, breathless, the building humming louder, like it was paying attention. "You can't leave it unfinished," she whispered. "It will follow you." "Then let it," I said. I wrenched free and ran. The corridor seemed longer this time, folding back on itself, the lights flickering erratically. The floor shifted under my feet, subtle enough to doubt, strong enough to slow me. Behind me I heard her calling my name, then the girl's, then something that wasn't a name at all, just intention made sound. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The exit door resisted, the handle stiff and uncooperative, but I threw my weight against it until it gave way. Cold air hit my face, sharp and grounding. I stumbled out into the stairwell, then into the main hallway, alarms beginning to sound somewhere distant and confused. By the time campus security arrived, the hidden door was sealed again. No record of the corridor, no sign of my roommate. Her room was empty, her files gone. Her name, when I tried to give it, slipped away from me like something I'd never fully known. They told me I'd had a breakdown, stress, sleep deprivation. I didn't argue. I let them believe it. I transferred out at the end of the semester. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel it, the pull of quiet spaces, the temptation to let myself rest too completely somewhere familiar. I fight it by moving, by remembering my name, by staying just a little unfinished. The dorm still stands. New students move in every year. Most of them never notice anything wrong. But occasionally, when I dream, I'm back in that narrow space, hand pressed against warm brick, knowing exactly where to push. And I wake with the certainty that if I ever stop resisting, if I ever decide I'm too tired to keep myself whole, The building will be ready. It remembers me, and it's very patient. The dorm went quiet after that. Not the uneasy quiet I'd grown used to, but something closer to neutrality, like a held breath finally released. Campus security sealed off the old wing for renovations. My roommate's name vanished from the housing records with bureaucratic efficiency. When I asked what had happened to her, I was told she'd withdrawn mid-semester for medical reasons. The phrasing was gentle, final. No one met my eyes when they said it. I packed what little I owned and moved into temporary housing on the other side of campus, a newer building, brighter, too much glass. The first night there, I slept with the lights on and woke to nothing more than the hum of air conditioning and distant traffic. For a while, that felt like relief. Classes resumed, assignments piled up, people spoke to me again without careful pauses. I learned how to answer questions about my absence with rehearsed vagueness. Stress, burnout, a rough adjustment period. The words fit easily enough. They always do. I told myself it was over. The first sign that it wasn't came a week later when I found a scarf folded on my desk. It took me a moment to recognize it. Soft fabric, muted color, not something I remembered buying. I stood there, staring at it, waiting for the spike of fear that used to come so readily. It didn't arrive. Instead, there was a dull sense of familiarity, like recognizing a handwriting style without recalling the name attached to it. I threw the scarf away. The whispers returned after that. Not constant, not urgent, just occasional, a suggestion of sound when the room was otherwise still. My name sometimes not. I'd pause, listen, then continue whatever I was doing. I told myself it was residual stress, the mind replaying old patterns because it didn't know how to stop. Once in the library, I reached for a book I'd never read and opened it directly to a page I'd underlined years ago. I stared at the marks, neat and deliberate, and tried to remember the moment I'd made them. Nothing came. The absence felt practiced. I avoided the old dorm entirely, took longer routes, chose classes far from that side of campus. Still, there were moments, walking past brick buildings at dusk, standing too close to a wall in a quiet stairwell, when I felt a familiar pressure behind my eyes, a sense of alignment just slightly off. Each time I stepped away. Movement became my defense. At night, I dreamed less, but when I did, the dreams were shallow and precise. No chaos, no fear, just repetition, walking the same corridor, sitting at the same desk, pressing my hand against a surface that yielded just a little in recognition. I woke from those dreams calm. That frightened me more than panic ever had. Near the end of the semester, I received an email from campus housing, a routine survey. At the bottom, a single question asked whether I'd experienced any unresolved issues during my stay. I hovered over the keyboard longer than necessary. In the end, I left it blank. The final thing, the one I still don't have a good explanation for, happened on move-out day. I was clearing the last of my belongings from the temporary room when I noticed something wedged behind the dresser. A notebook, worn cover, softened edges, the same neat handwriting inside. Dates that stopped just before I arrived on campus. On the last page there was an entry I didn't remember writing, but knew, with unsettling certainty, I could have written. Still here, just quieter now. I closed the notebook and sat on the floor for a long time, listening to the sounds of other students leaving, laughter, doors slamming, voices echoing down the hall. Life continuing with comforting indifference. I left the notebook behind. I don't know what became of the missing girl. I don't know what became of my roommate. Officially, there's no connection between us anymore. Just 3 names filed separately, none of them meaning very much to anyone else. As for me, I finished the semester. I transferred schools. I learned how to anchor myself in small, deliberate ways, saying my name out loud when I wake up, keeping my routines flexible, never letting any one place feel too permanent. Most days, it works, but sometimes when I catch my reflection in a dark window or hear a familiar melody drifting from somewhere I can't locate, I feel it again. That faint, patient pull. Not a demand, not even a threat, an invitation. And in those moments, I can't quite tell whether I'm being called back or whether a part of me never really left. You listened till the end because somewhere this story connected with you. If you heard something, don't look back, move forward, and be silent. This channel is for those who enjoy stories that stay in their mind long after they're over. If this story gave you that feeling, support the channel by subscribing it and stay connected with me in this video.